You wake to the sound of the waves striking wood. The air tastes of rust and salt, and your wrists ache where iron bites. Somewhere above deck, a gull cries, a sound of freedom you no longer understand. Around you, bodies shift and whisper in a dozen languages, none your own. You are cargo now, and the world has learned to measure breath in coin. Before we begin, a moment across time. Wherever you're listening from, let us know. It's extraordinary that from every shore and city, we can gather to uncover what empires tried to hide. Like, subscribe, and share this history with those who believe beauty and power are separate things, because Rome proved they never were. The harbor of Delos gleamed beneath the Aegean sun. Traders shouted, parchment fluttered, and ships bobbed at the docks like beasts of burden. Among amphorae and spice crates stood the human stalls, platforms of polished stone where boys and girls were arranged by height, skin, and promise. The Romans called this place Emporium Totius Orbis, the market of the whole world. They weren't exaggerating. From Gaul and Cappadocia, from the coasts of Syria and the plains of Thrace, caravans arrived with their living cargo. Dealers, mangones, kept precise records, age, complexion, hair color, temperament. Each child was a line in a ledger, an investment to be oiled, perfumed, and displayed. The most prized were the delicati, delicate ones, whose beauty blurred the boundary between adornment and art. Under the colonnades, auctioneers worked like priests. One held up a boy with hair the color of wheat. 13 years, he proclaimed, trained to read, to sing, to serve. The crowd murmured approval. A senator's steward stepped forward, lifting the boy's chin to inspect his teeth. 2,000 sesterces, the herald began. 3. 4. The hammer struck marble. The child was led away. Rome's appetite for youth was never merely lust, it was order. To own beauty was to own victory. The delicatus embodied conquest itself, a foreign trophy domesticated, aestheticized, and paraded as proof of civilization's reach. In the empire's economy of desire, even innocence was taxable. A philosopher might have called it refinement. A slave trader knew it as arithmetic. Oil darkened pale limbs to a fashionable sheen. Greek tutors taught the boys poetry so they could charm their masters with verses they'd never been free to choose. Behind the facade of luxury, the system ran with mechanical precision. Records from Cicero's correspondence mention a friend purchasing 2 handsome lads from Asia for a dinner party. Petronius, Nero's arbiter of taste, wrote of banquets where boys poured wine as if they were music given form. What Rome called elegance was built on lives unrecorded. The markets themselves were theaters of contradiction. Perfume mixed with sweat, laughter masked terror. A flute played from somewhere among the stalls, its melody curling above the noise of bartering. The air shimmered with heat and greed. On one platform, a child from Gaul cried softly, not from pain, but confusion. "What is he saying?" a woman asked her companion. The man shrugged. "Something barbarian." They turned away as the herald began again. For the slavers, such scenes were business. For Rome, they were civilization at work. The Ius Gentium, the law of nations, declared that any foreign captive could be enslaved. War made the supply endless. Legionaries raided villages in Britannia, marched prisoners through Gaul, shipped them south through Massilia and across the sea. Every triumphal procession meant fresh merchandise. The empire's arteries, its roads, ports, and coinage carried not only goods but bodies. Yet, even among the enslaved, hierarchy ruled. A delicatus was kept indoors, groomed, dressed in silk. Others labored in fields or quarries. To the elite, the delicate boys symbolized control, the ability to possess without pity, to refine cruelty into beauty. Seneca, writing from his marble villa, warned that indulgence corrupts the soul, even as his own household teemed with attendants chosen for their grace. "We enslave," he wrote, "what delights us most. What became of those boys? A few were freed, rewarded for obedience with a name and a tunic. Most vanished, traded again, discarded when youth faded. In rare cases they rose to notoriety. Antinous, beloved of Emperor Hadrian, was immortalized in marble across the empire after drowning in the Nile. Temples were built in his memory. His image became the template for beauty itself. Behind every statue of him stands the silence of thousands who had no sculptor. The archaeology of this trade is scattered and stubborn. Inscriptions list sales beside pottery and cattle. Mosaics depict graceful attendants holding cups, but their eyes never meet the viewers. On one wall in Ostia, a graffito survives. "I was bought for laughter." Nothing else. Rome taught the world that beauty could be owned, that desire dressed in ceremony could be called culture. Its markets perfected the art of turning flesh into currency. When night fell over Delos, the harbor quieted. Oil lamps reflected on the water like coins cast to the gods. The ships waiting offshore were heavy with their new cargo. In the darkness below deck, the sea rocked softly, and the air filled with breathing. Hundreds of slow, terrified breaths. Above them, the traders counted profit. Below, a boy whispered his name to himself, over and over, as if repetition might make it real again. But Rome was listening too, and in Rome, every name had a price. The door closes behind him with the sound of silk brushing marble. The air is warm, perfumed with myrrh and lamp smoke. Somewhere, a lyre plays the same 3 notes again and again, the sound muffled by curtains so heavy they seem to breathe. In this world, silence is language and obedience is art. In the heart of Rome, beyond the noise of the markets and the roar of the circus, lies another kind of theater, the domus, the aristocrat's house, where power performs itself in private. The walls gleam with imported alabaster. The floors shimmer with mosaics depicting myths of conquest and submission. To step inside is to enter a choreography of control, one rehearsed, refined, and repeated until even pain acquires rhythm. The boys who served here were not untrained servants. They were products of a system that transformed captivity into ceremony. Purchased for their beauty, they were taught to speak softly, to walk noiselessly, to anticipate needs before words were spoken. Their very existence was an ornament to their master's prestige, evidence of taste and wealth, as essential to the Roman image of refinement as the fountains in the atrium or the scrolls in the library. At dawn, they rose before the household stirred. Tutors drilled them in Greek and Latin so their voices might please in conversation as much as in song. They learned posture from dancers, wit from poets, restraint from philosophers who preached moderation yet dined in excess. "Control yourself," one tutor might murmur, adjusting a trembling hand, "for grace begins where fear ends." But fear never ended. It only learned to bow. By midday, the house filled with visitors, senators, poets, generals, men whose public virtues were recited in marble inscriptions, but whose private desires flickered behind drawn curtains. To attend these gatherings, the boys were polished like jewels. Their hair was perfumed with saffron and cardamom, their skin dusted with gold powder that glowed in lamplight. A slave named Callistus once wrote in a surviving letter, "We were to shine so brightly they forgot we were owned." In such rooms, laughter hid calculation. Conversation about philosophy, about stoic virtue, temperance, and the mastery of passions, mingled with glances that betrayed all 3. Petronius, the Emperor Nero's arbiter of taste, described this double life with cruel precision. In his Satyricon, he depicted banquets where elegance masked depravity, and servants existed as both decoration and diversion. "Beauty," he wrote, "is another kind of obedience. Behind these performances stood women, too, mistresses of the house who orchestrated elegance with quiet cruelty. They chose which slaves served wine, which played the flute, which poured oil over guests' hands. A misplaced look, a faltering step, could earn a beating administered not in rage but in ritual, as though correction were a form of artistry. The philosopher Seneca once wrote that a master should not strike in anger but in reason, that discipline preserved order. But what order requires a child to bleed gracefully? The emperor's own chambers magnified this system into spectacle. Suetonius describes how Nero surrounded himself with attendants as soft as maidens, trained to mimic the gestures of courtiers, to laugh at command. One, named Sporus, was dressed as an empress after Nero had him castrated, paraded through Rome beneath a veil, his silence mistaken for consent. In those halls of perfumed shadows, submission became pageantry. Juvenal, bitter and unflinching, mocked this hypocrisy in his satires. "They preach virtue," he wrote, while teaching their slaves the art of pleasure. Yet his words, intended as moral outrage, also reveal fascination. Even condemnation became another form of voyeurism. The boundary between disgust and desire was as thin as the silk curtains that separated chamber from corridor. In the training rooms of the household, the process continued long after the guests departed. Older slaves instructed the younger ones in posture and speech, in how to serve without being seen. Some were forced to memorize poetry about the gods' own seductions, Zeus and Ganymede, Apollo and Hyacinthus, stories that made divine what was demanded of them. "When you recite," an overseer might whisper, "remember, the gods never refused." Every surface in the domus reflected mastery, the marble, the mirrors, the human beings. Yet beneath the discipline, cracks formed. One boy, recorded in a faded household ledger as Philetus, aged 14, mute, carved a mark behind a wall mosaic in the peristyle, a simple figure of a bird with broken wings. No one would notice until centuries later, when archaeologists brushed away ash and dust to find his silent rebellion etched into plaster. How many others left signs we no longer recognize? A misaligned tessera in a mosaic, a thumbprint in wet clay, a wrong note struck on a lyre. The empire's grandeur depended on their invisibility, but invisibility leaves traces, even in silence. As evening fell, the house returned to ritual. Lamps were lit, wine diluted, laughter rehearsed anew. From the garden, the scent of roses mixed with the smoke of burning incense. Somewhere within the inner chambers, a soft voice repeated a lesson. To serve is to please. To please is to survive. Outside, the city roared with festivals and firelight. Inside, the air grew still. In that stillness, beauty hardened into duty, and desire became another instrument of power. Tomorrow, the same door would open again. The same hands would anoint the same faces with oil and gold. The same smiles would be summoned, as flawless and fragile as marble. But for now, in the hush before dawn, when lamps flicker low and the laughter has faded, the house breathes like a living thing. Its walls remember every whisper, every cry swallowed before it reached the air. And somewhere deep within its perfumed corridors, a boy stares at his reflection in a polished bronze mirror and wonders which face is truly his, the one he shows or the one Rome refuses to see. The ruins breathe when the tourists leave. Marble turns gold beneath the setting sun, and from the cracks between stones, wildflowers push through like forgotten prayers. The empire that once owned the world has dissolved into dust, and yet, in every fragment of mosaic, the faces remain, boys with eternal eyes, lips parted, waiting to speak. Time has freed them, but only by erasing who they were. Centuries after the last delicatus was auctioned, silence became their only memorial. Archaeologists in Pompeii and Herculaneum uncover frescoes of musicians, cupbearers, and attendants, painted with the same precision once reserved for gods. Their names are gone, replaced by gestures, the turn of a shoulder, the soft fall of hair. Even in art, they exist only to be seen. In one villa's remains, a wall bears the faint trace of a scratched line. Servus fui, nunc umbra sum. I was a slave, now I am a shadow. No one knows who carved it or when. Perhaps the hand that wrote it was small. Perhaps the boy lived long enough to see his beauty fade and his purpose with it. Rome's brilliance depended on that vanishing. The empire's laws left little room for sentiment. A slave's name was never permanent. He was Eros or Felix, Primus or Ligdus, useful, replaceable, anonymous. If freed, he inherited his master's family name, a reminder that liberty itself was a gift, not a right. For those who served in the houses of power, the illusion of intimacy often hid the certainty of disposal. A delicatus who grew too old or too scarred might be sold to labor camps, exiled to the provinces, or simply left to die. There were no witnesses, no funerals, and yet traces of affection survived. A funerary plaque found near the Appian Way reads, "To my sweetest boy, once a slave, now my freedman." His laughter warmed the house. No date, no master's name, only grief, stripped of rank. Another epitaph from Carthage says, "He was once beloved, then forgotten." 2,000 years later, the stone still weeps salt when it rains. After Rome's fall, its habits lived on. In Byzantium, eunuchs inherited the delicates role, advisors, musicians, ornaments of the palace. They were the empire's paradox, powerful yet powerless, entrusted with secrets but denied a future. From Constantinople, the tradition drifted east to the Ottoman courts, where young captives served sultans in silken chambers, and west to the Italian Renaissance, where noblemen collected pages whose youth was considered refinement. Rome had collapsed, but its grammar of beauty endured. What does it mean when exploitation survives collapse? When art outlives the lives it consumed? The frescoes and poems that once glorified servitude became templates for later ages. Renaissance painters resurrected the Roman ideal, saints and angels with the faces of servants. Enlightenment philosophers wrote of liberty while commissioning portraits of their attendants. The empire's shadow had changed shape but not substance. In modern museums, those echoes still breathe. At the Capitoline, a marble bust of an unnamed boy stands under glass. His curls are carved with impossible precision. His eyes are polished blank. The label reads simply, 2nd century CE, artist unknown. Visitors photograph him, admire the craftsmanship, and move on. None ask who he was. Perhaps that is the empire's last victory. Not cruelty, but forgetting. When Christianity spread, it tried to wash the blood from marble. Augustine wrote that slavery was the result of sin, yet he never condemned it outright. In practice, the church inherited the same hierarchy it denounced. Choir boys replaced cupbearers. Service became sanctified submission. The architecture changed, the silence remained. Excavations at Herculaneum revealed a bathing chamber with a mosaic of dolphins circling a child musician. The gold tesserae still shimmer under torchlight. Was it decoration or memorial? Did the patron love the boy, or commemorate him as one might a prize horse? The question cannot be answered, only felt. Every recovered image is both beauty and evidence. Historians estimate that by the 1st century, 1 in 3 people in Italy was enslaved. Among them, countless children. Their anonymity was the price of Rome's order. To build its aqueducts, its law, its art, the empire required forgetting. To remember each face would have been unbearable. And yet memory resists even silence. Beneath layers of ash and empire, fingerprints remain in the clay of amphorae, initials scratched beneath marble benches, a child's footprint hardened in dust. These marks speak more truth than all the polished inscriptions of senators and emperors. They tell us that history is built not by the powerful, but upon them. The modern world, for all its progress, still moves to Rome's rhythm. The cult of youth, the commodification of beauty, the industry of appearance, all descend from the same inheritance. Our screens and advertisements echo the frescoes of the Domus, trading in the same illusion, that beauty without consent is desirable, and that perfection absolves its price. We have changed the tools, not the hunger. At night, the ruins of the Forum lie in silence. The marble columns throw long shadows across the earth, and the wind sighs through them like breath through hollow bones. Somewhere beneath those stones rest the nameless ones, the singers, the attendants, the ornaments of empire. Their bodies have turned to dust, but the idea of them endures, stitched into art, language, and desire. When the archaeologist brushes soil from a mosaic face, he uncovers not memory, but guilt. The boy's gaze meets his across 2,000 years, unblinking, unaging. It asks no forgiveness, only recognition. The empire that built aqueducts, libraries, and laws could not build mercy. It mastered beauty, not compassion. And as long as we gaze upon its art without seeing the lives beneath, the empire is not dead. It waits quietly in every reflection. In the final silence, when the last light fades from the marble and the names are gone, the question remains. Soft as dust, sharp as truth. Who were they? And why did we not remember sooner?